And she's like, you need to come over here and cook.
Yeah.
And it was like, I'm like froze, right? Like I'm
Yeah.
like, here I am coming in like I'm trying to teach something. Miss Johnson just put me up on game.
Miss Johnson just spent some good money
Yeah, she was like, nah.
on whatever she just made. She like, yo, y'all not about to put this food to waste because
That's
you
it.
vegan now.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it. And I share that story because, I think that's what's been so important about this work, right? Like all the young folks come, they bring themselves, and in the beginning I was trying to teach them something. And then once I learned like, yo, I'm not here to teach anybody anything. We're here to learn together. And that this environment has to be a place where we're discovering things as a group. And it's going to change over time because the discoveries are influenced by the environment, the world around us, and who each individual person is who comes to the place. And so for a young person to be seen like that, to be like, yo, you have value, and I don't know what we're going to be doing in your time here. You're going to have to tell us. And in the beginning, they're like, nah, this ain't real. You don't really want that.
I just interviewed an interesting guy. He runs a tutoring business from teaching kids math. And one of the questions I asked him, because I consider myself in terms of coaching, working with people, working with kids, working with older people, a teacher.
Right.
Right. And, when you teach, one of the things that I've realized about teaching is that you're learning more
Yes.
than sometimes the student.
Yes.
Because, when you teach, you're actually seeing, okay, like, for example, you were teaching veganism, and she called you and said, well, I just finished making this. Now you got to come over here and make a good vegan dish for all of us. Like, that was a learning moment for you while you were teaching something.
Right.
So now you're prepared to like, okay, well, I guess I got to make something and bring it now next time versus just teaching them about it. And so it's interesting, like I've learned this in this exploration of wanting to help others. You start to learn more about yourself. And like when I came here and I started to volunteer and I realized like, man, I had to do the work. So, obviously the pandemic happened and everybody went into isolation. and it was a lot of good and a lot of bad that came out of that. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I dived into was this, things like disenfranchised grief. Things like the primal wound in terms of like when, we talked about earlier, like when you're getting stripped away from your biological mother at an early age, there's actual biological factors that take place. Yeah. But this one thing I want to that's going to tie into my next question about disenfranchised grief. You did a podcast one time and you spoke about the incident, unfortunate incident with the young man.
In Uvalde, Texas.
Yeah. Who I don't think he was in the foster care system, but he definitely had came from a dysfunctional situation family-wise. And unfortunately, and God bless and rest in peace to everybody that lost their life in that tragic event. But you had some thoughts on that episode that you spoke about. You care to share with the audience on that?
Yeah, man. My point is that pain is a projectile. And if we're not, as a community, looking at someone's pain and addressing it, then it becomes something that explodes. And we always want to respond to the explosion. Right. Because we don't feel like we have responsibility over the explosion, right? It's a catalytic event. It's like that happened, they're bad, right? So you can point all your energy at what's wrong with that human being without taking any ownership of it. Right. And so my position is that kid existed in the community. Right. That kid, even though he was young, right, had been around other people. Other people had the opportunity to see his pain. Other people had the opportunity to see what that young person was moving through. And I guarantee if that kid had been in a space where people saw him and valued him and gave him some tools, that there wouldn't have been the opportunity for those things to happen. Yeah. And so we spend so much time talking about the event that's the catalyst for like a political campaign and a catalyst for us calling society wrong or blaming a racial identity or blaming a group of people because of whatever conditions that they're in for what's happening. And we just use that as our own catalyst to make us feel as though we're better and greater than. When the reality is that projectile of pain is something that is pervasive across all the human condition. And if we take the time to say, like, what's really going on? What is happening with young folks that they're feeling like, I got to take up arms and go kill somebody, kill some kids at my grade school to correct this projectile of pain that is building up with me that I don't know what to do with, right? And that to me is what's most hurtful about what goes on. It's like we never had those conversations, right? We had the conversation like, the family was bad and there was the kid was bad. He was a troubled kid,
troubled kid.
Yeah, and he had mental health problems.
You put it on. Sorry to cut you.
No, cut there.
Because I see it so much and I'm passionate about it. Because you mentioned it earlier, you did a study.
Yeah.
That shows in the media, in Hollywood, and film, and people. When I first rolled out this podcast, I was like, I don't want to talk about nothing political because I really don't like politics.
Right.
Only because I come from an environment where you actually see that both sides are pit against the middle.
Right.
You actually see that while two sides are arguing, the people in the middle suffer the most.
That's it.
And it's sad because you see it a lot in the paper, like troubled kid. So troubled children don't come from troubled communities. Troubled kids don't come from troubled families. Troubled families and troubled communities don't get affected by troubled systems.
Right.
Right? When I've done some research for myself, and I see that unfortunately that generations of families are affected.
Yeah.
Of foster care and of being part of a system, is from jail to foster care, and it's hard to think well, is that by design?
Mm-hmm.
Is it purposely not funded? Is it purposely people are not paying attention to certain things? Is it by design? Because when I had looked into what disenfranchised grief was, it was literally defined as a way where let's just say, you lost your arm from a chemical reaction at a facility that you worked at. It's very different than saying my mother died.
Right.
Disenfranchised grief means it literally is not a part of the collective. So I'm going to just go to the next story.
Right.
Everybody care about a lot of things that actually affect them to some degree, but when you go past a person that's homeless on the street and foster care, kids that go through the foster care system, they get aged at 18 or 21?
21 in California,
21.
yeah.
And you're seeing young kids strung out on drugs on the street.
Yeah.
And you walk past them and you feel like that can't, that doesn't necessarily affect me because, why would you see the connection?
Right.
Because your life has, you perceive that your life is not connected to that.
Yeah.
The point of why I wanted to do this podcast and the point of why I wanted to have this conversation is that when people start to complain about things, eventually it does get connected to you.
Yeah.
Because essentially what starts to happen is that the things that we don't pay attention to eventually starts to affect you.
Mm-hmm.
And then now we want to put it on politics.
Right.
So I bring up that story of that unfortunate situation because that was a young man.
Mm-hmm.
He was a child
who
killed other children.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, he was a child. And children, unfortunately, in a broken world, become broken, and then they continue to break others.
Mm-hmm.
There's the saying, hurt people hurt people.
Right.
And so what I really, you're probably the only person I heard speak about that because I actually had the same feelings when it happened.
Mm-hmm.
People were asking me about things. I was like, I don't really want to talk about it.
Right.
Because for me, it was it's just going to continue to happen if you just focus on one aspect of the story.
Yeah.
And you don't pull down the veil of everything else that actually got that young man to that point.
Yeah, man. I think, and I want to ask you this question. because when you talk about disenfranchised grief, what it also brings up for me is there's this, there's epigenetics and generational trauma that comes into these narratives. And one of my mentors says, like pain pushes until the vision pulls. And so there is this like callus of pain that is happening. And we're still like embodying the pain instead of moving to a place of having it pull us to something different.